If you live in an area where mask mandates have been dropped and attitudes about COVID are more lax than in, say, New York or Washington, D.C., it might feel like people are behaving like COVID is over. Sorry to say, it's not. While there's a growing body of evidence that the Omicron variant causes milder illness, especially for vaccinated people, it still leaves a lot of folks sick, potentially even for weeks, months, or longer if they happen to get long COVID from their infection. And because it's so transmissible, death counts aren't falling and hospitalizations are rising. Even milder illness takes its toll in one of the most important and contentious environments in the pandemic era, schools. Especially in states that have loosened up restrictions and resisted vaccine mandates, staff shortages are hitting hard as case counts continue to rise. In Orange County, Florida, home to Orlando, earlier this month, school district leaders put a mask mandate back in place and excused absences after absences reported by staff. The numbers were especially high for bus drivers. The county has 650 bus drivers, and on the first day back from the holiday break, only 95 came to work. In towns around Austin, Texas, school districts are canceling or shortening school bus routes and have asked parents to step in to drive buses and substitute teach. In South Carolina, schools have had to close in-person learning because of shortages, with shortages of support staff like bus drivers, custodians, and food service workers driving the decisions to close. Even in states where leaders have put a few more restrictions in place, the Omicron variant spread is leaving schools without many support staff. In both Illinois and Washington state, schools have also temporarily shifted to remote-only classes due to bus driver shortages. And that's led to a lot of pressure on school districts' reopening plans. In Chicago, schools closed and forced many students back home amid negotiations between the city and teachers union over reopening. And students have walked out of classes, protesting as they call for more protections against COVID-19. These shortages and closures are taking their toll on school districts across the country, and we can look at them from a local perspective. In Montana, the surge in cases from the Omicron variant is still in earlier stages than it is on the East Coast. It's posing new challenges for school administrators dealing with staffing issues, difficulties in accessing COVID testing, and more remote learning. Newsy correspondent Maritza Giorgio is in Montana for us and has been reporting on how school districts are navigating another semester of uncertainty. Maritza, we've been talking about how schools are dealing with shortages of teachers, support staff, bus drivers, etc. How much of a challenge has the Omicron variant posed for school administrators? And let's say, compared to other variants?
Well, it's posed a huge challenge because, as you know, the Omicron variant just spreads so rapidly. It's so transmissible, and it's just taking people out, putting people in quarantine. And in Montana, our case numbers are higher than ever. And that's holding true for our largest school districts. One superintendent told me it's just a shocker to see how many positive cases they're seeing, even though they expected to see an increase with Omicron. Just that number that they see on the screen is shocking many of them. Multiple districts are going remote. They anticipate more. And as you said, this real issue is staffing. One district superintendent told me that if more than 20% of their staff is out, that's when they go remote. They're relying a little bit on parent volunteers. I know some administrative staff members have been helping out in schools, but they say it's not ideal. It's really just more of a Band-Aid. And in Oklahoma, even, the governor issued an executive order to authorize state agency employees to substitute teach, but they just can't shut the doors. It's really posing a challenge, I think, overall across the country right now. It's a really hard time to be a school administrator and a teacher.
We've talked about, mask mandates. We've talked about remote learning. I mean, what else are schools doing to keep students safe during this surge?
I think the biggest thing is asking students and parents, stay home and don't send your kids to school if they're sick, even if they're mildly sick, because as we know with COVID-19, you don't know how it's going to affect everyone. We have a lot of asymptomatic cases or mild symptoms. They're just begging parents, please don't send your sick kids to school. They're also encouraging testing, and we've really heard some mixed reports on testing and test capacity. Some of the larger districts have run out of tests. They're working with partners to try to handle that. But even if they have the tests, if they're having staffing issues and they don't have enough people to administer those tests, that's a whole other issue. And then on top of that, with Omicron, as we've reported, as we've talked about, these at-home tests don't always pick it up. So that's a whole other issue.
It seems like we are in a very different place than we were in March of 2020. I mean, one of the biggest things is that we have, vaccines and boosters and that sort of deal. I'm curious to know, though, what sort of lessons have schools learned since March of 2020, and how are they able to stay open now?
I think when you've been through almost 2 years of a pandemic, there are plans in place, there are protocols, they have contingencies. And as one superintendent told me, a widespread a vaccine that's available widespread across the country. So that is really a bonus here. And the ability to go remote more easily. It's not this huge learning curve they need to get through. In Montana, one superintendent talked to me about the fact that we're in a little bit of a better place because there's not this pressure that some districts are under to go back to full remote learning. We're just not quite there yet, but we are seeing these cases where districts are popping up, or individual schools even, where they're going remote for a week at a time just to handle the surge in cases.
Newsy correspondent Maritza Giorgio, thank you so much for joining us on ITL.
Thank you.